The stars seemed to quiver in the observation deck of the Zepyrian flagship, Sovereign Dominance. Grand Admiral Krygan stood motionless, his tall frame silhouetted against the endless void, six-fingered hands clasped tightly behind his back. His silver uniform gleamed under the soft ambient lighting, medals and insignia of the Zepyrian Empire catching the light with each measured breath. "Repeat that report," he ordered, voice eerily calm despite the tension radiating from his rigid posture. Lieutenant Commander Zarn approached with practiced precision. Data tablet extended. "The border monitoring stations in the Kepler 57 sector have detected an unprecedented fleet formation, sir. Initial scans indicate approximately 250 vessels of various configurations, moving in perfect formation across our outer boundary." "And their origin?" Krygan turned, his pale blue skin creasing around narrowed eyes. "Unknown, Admiral. They bear no recognized imperial signatures, nor do they match any cataloged species from the diplomatic registry." Krygan's expression darkened. In his 3 centuries of service to the Zepyrian Empire, he had never encountered an unidentified species with fleet capabilities of this magnitude. The Empire's dominion stretched across 17 galactic sectors, with technological superiority that had remained unchallenged for millennia. "Energy signatures?" he asked, reaching for the data tablet. "That's the concerning part, sir." Zarn's voice lowered. "They're emitting power levels that exceed our battlecruisers by factors of 3 to 5, and yet—" He hesitated. "Speak freely, Major." "The signatures are inconsistent, almost chaotic, as if each vessel operates on entirely different energy principles." Krygan studied the readings, brow furrowing. "Assemble the War Council immediately. Alert all border fleets to battle readiness, but maintain position. No engagement without direct Imperial authorization." As Zarn hurried away, Krygan turned back to the viewport. Somewhere beyond that glittering expanse of stars, something was coming, something that shouldn't exist. Captain Mara Vance rubbed her temples, fighting the fatigue that threatened to overwhelm her. The bridge of the UES Vanguard hummed with subdued activity, screens displaying the scattered formation of what had once been Earth's civilian fleet, now converted into the vanguard of humanity's desperate migration. "Status report on the Proxima convoy," she requested, voice rough from too many hours without sleep. Lieutenant Rico looked up from his communications station. "All 217 vessels accounted for, Captain. The mining platforms have completed their asteroid extraction and are processing materials for the manufacturing ships. The agricultural vessels report optimal production levels." Vance nodded, allowing herself a moment of relief. 2 million souls spread across a cobbled-together fleet of retrofitted cruise liners, cargo haulers, mining platforms, and whatever else humanity could launch into space before Earth's final collapse. 2 million out of billions. The thought still hollowed her from the inside. "And our scouts?" she asked. "Reporting back now. They've detected significant military presence in the Kepler sector." Rico's fingers danced across his console. "Consistent with Imperial formations, based on our limited intelligence. Definitely not coalition or fringe territories." Elena Martel, the fleet's chief engineer, approached with a tablet displaying weapon modification schematics. Her coveralls were stained with hydraulic fluid, hair hastily tied back, eyes bright with the manic energy that had kept the fleet functioning through impossible odds. "We've completed the modifications on the Helios cruise liners," she reported. "Industrial lasers have been successfully repurposed for defensive capabilities, and the cargo bays have been converted to drone manufacturing." "Offensive capability?" Vance asked. "About 60% of what a purpose-built warship might manage, but with triple the power generation capacity. These cruise ships were built with redundant systems and excessive amenities. We're putting all that wasted energy to good use." Vance studied the schematics. What Elena and her engineering teams had accomplished bordered on miraculous. Mining lasers reconfigured as weapons, cargo loaders retrofitted with makeshift armor plating, entertainment systems repurposed for sensor arrays and electronic countermeasures. "And the signal modifications?" Elena's tired face broke into a grin. That's the best part. We've implemented the Phantom ecosystem across all vessels. Each ship now appears as two distinct signatures on standard scanning equipment. We've even randomized the energy patterns to make identification more difficult. Vance allowed herself a thin smile. Good. We need every advantage we can get. She turned to the tactical display showing their course through the Kepler sector. We can't avoid this confrontation. The scans confirm this is the only viable path to reach the habitable systems we've identified. Captain, Rico called from his station. Incoming transmission from the Artemis colony ship. Governor Chen is requesting a fleet commander's meeting. Tell them. Vance caught herself. No. Belay that. There is no Governor Chen. The Artemis was destroyed during the Jupiter incident. She turned sharply. Full alert. All ships to combat readiness. We have Imperial infiltration. When? In the Zepyrian War Council chamber aboard the Sovereign Dominance. Holographic displays cast an ethereal blue glow over the assembled officers. Krigan stood at the head of the oval table, watching as three-dimensional projections of the unknown fleet rotated slowly above its polished surface. These vessels defy conventional classification. Commander Thelix, head of Imperial Intelligence, explained. While some appear to match standard configurations for mining, transport, or even passenger vessels, they've been extensively modified. Note the irregular energy distribution patterns. Krigan studied the projections with growing unease. And our reconnaissance? Largely ineffective, Admiral. Major Zarn reported. Our scout ships have encountered sophisticated countermeasures. The unknown fleet appears to be employing some form of signal duplication technology. We detect nearly twice as many vessels as are visually confirmed. Primitives don't develop countermeasures before warships. General Vrax growled, his weathered face set in contemptuous lines. This reeks of deception. Whether primitive or advanced, they are approaching Imperial territory with a fleet of unprecedented size. Krigan replied evenly. Their intentions remain unknown, but their capability is undeniable. He gestured to the tactical display. They maintain course toward the Proxima Zeta system. I propose we position the 7th Fleet to intercept at these coordinates. A show of Imperial might may persuade them to state their intentions before crossing our sovereign boundary. And if they refuse? Vrax asked. Krigan's expression hardened. Then they will learn why the Zepyrian Empire has stood unchallenged for 12,000 years. The first encounter occurred 3 days later in the cold emptiness between Proxima Zeta's 4th and 5th planets. The Zepyrian 7th Fleet, 50 warships arranged in perfect crescent formation, held position along the system's navigational plane. Their gleaming hulls reflected the distant sun. Weapon ports open in silent warning. Aboard the UES Vanguard, Captain Vance stood before her bridge crew, her voice steady despite the gravity of the moment. This is the moment we've prepared for, she said. Remember your training and your purpose? We are not conquerors or warriors by nature. We are survivors, seeking only a new home among the stars. But make no mistake. Her eyes hardened. We will defend our people with everything we have. She turned to Rico. Transmit our prepared greeting on all frequencies, both in Standard Earth English and the Universal Trade Language. Make it clear we seek peaceful passage. As the message transmitted, Elena approached the captain's chair. All ships report ready, Captain. The mining vessels are in position, and the converted passenger liners have their systems armed but powered down to avoid detection. And our surprises? Elena's smile was grim. Ready to deploy on your command. The tension on the bridge stretched like an over-tightened cable as they waited for a response. When it came, it wasn't in the form of communication, but action. The Zepyrian fleet began to move, spreading outward in a textbook encirclement pattern. They're deploying fighters, Rico reported, his voice tight. Standard Imperial intercept formation. No response to our transmission. None, Captain. Vance exhaled slowly. So be it. Signal the fleet. Operation Scrapyard is a go. What happened next would forever change how the Zepyrian Empire viewed warfare. As the Imperial fighters approached what appeared to be the front line of the human fleet, the mining vessels suddenly rotated, bringing their massive industrial equipment to bear. Enormous rock crushers, designed to pulverize asteroids for mineral extraction, spewed clouds of superheated metal fragments into space. Magnetic mining drones, normally used to collect ore, swarmed toward the fighters, attaching themselves to hulls and disrupting navigation systems. Construction cranes swung with surprising agility, grappling incoming missiles and redirecting them away from vital systems. Cargo haulers opened their massive bay doors, releasing thousands of modified maintenance drones that surrounded the Imperial fighters like mechanical insects. "They're falling back," Rico announced, surprise evident in his voice. "The Imperial fighters are retreating to their capital ships." Vance nodded grimly. They expected a conventional military response. Prepare for Phase 2. They won't make the same mistake twice. Aboard the Sovereign Dominance, Grand Admiral Krygan watched the tactical display with increasing disbelief. The fighters of the 7th Fleet, elite pilots with the most advanced weaponry in the Empire, were being repelled by what appeared to be industrial equipment. "Impossible," General Vrax breathed, staring at the display. "They're using mining equipment as weapons." "Not just as weapons," Krygan corrected, his analytical mind racing to understand what he was witnessing. "As incredibly effective weapons. Look at the coordination, the adaptation. These aren't random defensive measures. This is a calculated strategy." Major Zarn approached with updated scans. "Sir, we're detecting manufacturing signatures within their fleet. They appear to be producing ammunition and replacement components in real time." "During battle?" Krygan's disbelief was evident. No military in the galaxy conducts industrial production during active combat. "These aren't conventional military vessels," Zarn reminded him. "They appear to be primarily civilian ships that have been converted. Perhaps their entire industrial base is integrated into their fleet." Krygan studied the patterns of movement, the unconventional tactics. "Order the 7th Fleet to fall back and regroup. Dispatch cruisers to flanking positions. I want detailed scans of every vessel in that fleet." As the Imperial forces regrouped, the unknown fleet maintained position, making no attempt to advance or retreat. Their formation shifted continuously, smaller vessels moving between larger ones in patterns that defied traditional military doctrine. "Sir," Zarn reported after several hours of observation, "we've completed preliminary analysis of their communications. They're using an encryption method we've never encountered, but the language structure appears consistent throughout their fleet." "A single species?" Krygan asked. "It appears so. And based on radiation signatures and life support configurations, they're carbon-based, oxygen-breathing humanoids." Krygan's eyes narrowed. "Scan their fleet for signs of colony vessels or life support infrastructure beyond military requirements." The results, when they came, shifted his perspective entirely. The unknown fleet contained massive habitat structures, agricultural production facilities, educational centers, and medical installations. This wasn't merely a military force, it was an entire civilization in transit. "They're migrants," he murmured, pieces falling into place. But from where, and why in such numbers? The skirmish at Proxima Zeta had ended in a tactical withdrawal by the Imperial forces, but Captain Vance harbored no illusions that the confrontation was over. As the human fleet continued its careful progress through the system, she convened an emergency meeting of ship captains and section leaders in the Vanguard's conference room. "They'll be back, and in greater numbers," she stated without preamble. "Our industrial countermeasures worked as a surprise tactic, but they'll adapt. We need to accelerate our contingency plans." Elena Martel manipulated the holographic display, showing the fleet's current configuration. "We've increased production of defensive drones, and the agricultural ships have been moved to the center of our formation. The passenger liners have completed their weapons retrofits. And we've distributed our manufacturing capacity across multiple vessels to avoid creating obvious targets." Lieutenant Rico added, "Their scanning technology is more advanced than we anticipated. They've been probing our communication networks. I recommend implementing the Phantom Protocol ahead of schedule. Vance considered this. Operation Phantom was their most audacious countermeasure. A system-wide electronic warfare strategy designed to create the illusion of a fleet far larger than their actual numbers. It would require significant power resources and coordination, but if successful, could provide the deterrent they desperately needed. Begin preparations, she decided. We'll implement at the Zephyra orbital approach. That gives us 48 hours to fine-tune the system. Captain, one of the mining vessel commanders spoke up. My crew reports unusual activity in the asteroid belt we're approaching. Inconsistencies in mass distribution suggest artificial structures. Vance frowned. Imperial mining operations? Possible, but the configuration doesn't match Imperial designs from our intelligence database. Send a reconnaissance team, but maintain extreme caution. No engagement. Vance turned back to the assembled leaders. Our priority remains reaching the habitable zone beyond Zephyra. Intelligence suggests multiple potentially viable planets in the Kepler extension where we could establish a permanent colony. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders. 2 million lives depended on her decisions. 2 million survivors from a dead world, carrying the genetic and cultural heritage of an entire species. One more thing, she added, her voice solemn. Begin preparation for Protocol Omega. If we encounter insurmountable resistance, we need to ensure at least some of our people survive to carry on. Protocol Omega, the fleet's last resort. Splitting their forces into hundreds of smaller groups, scattering in all directions in the hope that some would escape detection and find sanctuary. Nobody wanted to consider it. But Vance knew her duty was to prepare for all contingencies. As the meeting concluded, Elena remained behind, concern evident in her expression. Mara, she said softly, using the captain's first name when they were alone. The crew is exhausted. The engineers haven't had proper rest in weeks. We're pushing the limits of human endurance. Vance sighed, allowing her rigid posture to slacken slightly. I know. But we have no choice. If we falter now, everything we've sacrificed, everyone we've lost, will have been for nothing. Elena placed a hand on her friend's shoulder. We'll make it. Humans are remarkably stubborn that way. A ghost of a smile touched Vance's lips. Stubborn enough to survive the end of our world, stubborn enough to convert cruise ships into battle cruisers. Let's hope we're stubborn enough to convince an empire to let us pass in peace. The next Imperial attack came as the human fleet approached Zephyra, a gas giant with 17 moons, 3 of which showed potential for temporary settlement. This time, the Zephyrian forces arrived with overwhelming numbers, 3 full battle groups converging from different vectors, clearly intending to surround the human fleet. Aboard the Sovereign Dominance, Grand Admiral Krygan observed the approaching confrontation with calculated precision. The intelligence gathered from the previous engagement had been thoroughly analyzed, and he had adjusted his strategy accordingly. Target their manufacturing vessels first, he instructed. Disrupt their production capacity, then focus on their communication nodes. They demonstrate unusual coordination. I want that advantage neutralized. Major Zarn monitored the deployment of Imperial forces with practiced efficiency. All units in position. Admiral, the unknown fleet is continuing on course towards Zephyra orbit. Curious, Krygan mused. They must realize they're outmatched, yet they make no attempt to alter course or disperse. Perhaps they lack the fuel reserves for evasive maneuvers. Zarn suggested, if they are indeed refugees, they may be operating with limited resources. Perhaps, Krygan acknowledged, though something about the situation nagged at his tactical instincts. Begin the encirclement. Battle Group Alpha will engage from the leading edge. The Imperial warships moved with elegant precision, their formation closing around the human fleet like a gloved hand around a delicate object. The first salvos of energy weapons lanced out, targeting what Imperial analysts had identified as manufacturing vessels. What happened next defied all expectations. As the Imperial weapons found their targets, the human fleet seemed to multiply before their eyes. where sensors had detected approximately 500 vessels, accounting for the signal duplication discovered earlier. Suddenly, there appeared to be over 1,000, then 1,200, then 1,500 distinct signatures. "What is happening?" Krygan demanded, staring at the tactical display in disbelief. "Unknown, Admiral," Zarn replied, his composure slipping. "Our sensors are detecting. It's impossible. They're registering over 600 new vessels that weren't there moments ago." Phantom signatures. Krygan realized, his mind racing. They've deployed some form of massive electronic countermeasure. He turned to his communications officer. "Order all ships to rely on visual confirmation before engagement. Ignore sensor readings." But the order came too late for many Imperial captains, who were already diverting fire toward non-existent targets. The human fleet's actual vessels used the confusion to execute a series of coordinated maneuvers that scattered the Imperial formation. Mining ships deployed clouds of reflective particles that further confused targeting systems, while converted passenger liners launched waves of small, unmanned drones that mimicked capital ship signatures. The bridge of the UES Vanguard vibrated with controlled chaos as Captain Vance coordinated the desperate gambit. "Phantom signatures holding," Rico reported, fingers flying across his console. "Imperial forces are splitting their fire across multiple false targets. Effectiveness of their barrage is down to 27%. "Maintain the illusion," Vance ordered. "Signal the Helios group to execute flanking maneuver Delta. Have the mining platforms concentrate disruption fields on their flagship." Elena Martel worked frantically at the engineering station. "Captain, we're redlining the power systems to maintain the phantom signatures. We can't sustain this level of output for more than 30 minutes. "We don't need 30 minutes," Vance replied grimly. "We just need enough time to reach Zephyra's gravity well. Once we're in the upper atmosphere, their sensors will be completely blind." The human fleet drove forward with desperate determination, absorbing punishing fire but refusing to break formation. Converted cargo haulers used their massive hulls to shield smaller, more vulnerable vessels. Passenger liners, their luxurious interiors now stripped for power generation, channeled every available joule into maintaining the phantom signature matrix that multiplied their numbers exponentially. Aboard the Sovereign Dominance, Krygan watched with growing frustration as his coordinated attack dissolved into chaos. Imperial warships, some of the most sophisticated vessels in the galaxy, were reduced to firing blindly at sensor ghosts or waiting for visual confirmation that came too late to be effective. "They're penetrating our formation," Zarn reported, unable to keep the incredulity from his voice. Battle Group Beta reports they can't maintain targeting locks. Group Gamma is requesting permission to deploy resonance charges. "Denied," Krygan snapped. "Resonance charges would affect our sensors as well. Order all groups to re-establish formation. Focus on confirmed visual targets only." But the momentum had shifted. As the human fleet approached Zephyra's outer atmosphere, they executed a brilliant maneuver that scattered the Imperial ships trying to maintain their encirclement, taking advantage of the gas giant's powerful gravity and radiation belts. The human vessels skimmed through regions that played havoc with Imperial sensors, further amplifying the effectiveness of their phantom signatures. By the time Krygan could reorganize his forces, the human fleet had established orbit around Zephyra's largest moon, a position that would require a costly frontal assault to dislodge them. "Hold position," he ordered, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Maintain blockade formation, but do not engage further. I want a complete analysis of what just happened." In the aftermath of what would later be called the Battle of Zephyra, both sides licked their wounds and reassessed their strategies. The human fleet had suffered significant damage, 27 vessels destroyed, dozens more severely damaged, but had achieved their immediate objective of reaching a defensible position. Captain Vance stood in the Vanguard's medical bay, moving slowly among the wounded. The ship's limited medical facilities were overwhelmed, with injured crew members lining the corridors on makeshift pallets. Despite their retrofitted weapons and desperate tactics, they were not soldiers. These were scientists, engineers, teachers, farmers. ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances. Dr. Sarah Linden, the fleet's chief medical officer, approached with a datapad. Her face was drawn with exhaustion, surgical scrubs stained with blood of various colors. "How bad?" Vance asked quietly. 342 confirmed casualties across the fleet. Over 1,000 injured, at least 200 critically. Linden's voice was clinical, but her eyes betrayed her emotion. "We're running low on synthetic blood and regenerative compounds. If we sustain similar losses in another engagement..." She didn't need to finish the thought. Vance placed a hand on the doctor's shoulder. "You're doing everything possible. We all are." Leaving the medical bay, Vance made her way to the ship's communication center, where Rico was coordinating with the other vessel commanders. "Status report," she requested. "The Imperial fleet has established a blockade formation around Zephyra," he informed her. "They're maintaining distance but haven't attempted further engagement. Our Phantom signatures are still active, but at reduced capacity to conserve power." "And our actual capabilities?" Rico hesitated before answering. "We've lost nearly 15% of our manufacturing capacity. The agricultural ships report minimal damage, but 3 water reclamation vessels were destroyed. We're redistributing population to compensate for the lost habitat space." Vance absorbed the information with a grim nod. "Have Elena prioritize repairs to the manufacturing vessels. We need to replace what we've lost before they attack again." "Captain," Rico's voice lowered. "Some of the ship commanders are suggesting we implement Protocol Omega now, while we still have the Phantom signatures to cover our dispersal." Vance shook her head firmly. "Not yet. Dispersal means abandoning any hope of establishing a viable colony. Scattered, we might survive, but humanity would eventually die out across 1,000 worlds. We need to stay together." She moved to the tactical display, studying the Imperial blockade. "They're regrouping, analyzing, adapting. So must we." She turned to Rico. "Prepare a transmission on all frequencies, directed at their command vessel. It's time we tried a different approach." Grand Admiral Krygan paced the length of his private quarters, mind racing through calculations and possibilities. The battle had not gone as expected. Far from it. The Imperial forces had suffered minimal physical losses, but the strategic defeat stung his pride and damaged his standing with the Imperial Admiralty. A soft chime announced Major Zarn's arrival. The intelligence officer entered with characteristic precision, carrying a data crystal. "The analysis is complete, Admiral," he reported. "You were correct. The Phantom signatures were created through a combination of drone deployments and sophisticated electromagnetic manipulation. They created the illusion of a fleet nearly 3 times their actual size." Krygan nodded, having already reached this conclusion. "And the vessels themselves?" "Confirmed to be retrofitted civilian craft, as we suspected. But..." Zarn hesitated. "Continue, Major." "Sir, the scans reveal extensive life support systems, agricultural production, educational facilities, even cultural preservation archives. This is no invasion force. It appears to be a refugee fleet." Krygan stopped pacing. "Refugees don't possess military countermeasures of this sophistication. They don't appear to be military in origin," Zarn explained, activating a holographic display. "Our analysis indicates these are adaptations of civilian technology. Mining equipment repurposed as weapons, communication arrays modified for electronic warfare. Even their Phantom signature technology appears derived from entertainment broadcasting systems." Krygan studied the holographic renderings with growing fascination. "Improvised defenses, created out of necessity rather than military doctrine." He turned to Zarn. "But refugees from where, and why in such numbers?" "Unknown, sir. Our linguistic analysis has identified their primary language, but it matches nothing in Imperial records." Before Krygan could respond, his communication officer's voice came through the intercom. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the unknown fleet. It's being broadcast on all frequencies." "Route it to my quarters," Krygan ordered, exchanging a glance with Zarn. The holographic display shifted, and a human female appeared. She wore a simple dark uniform with minimal insignia, her expression composed but showing signs of exhaustion. When she spoke, her words were translated through the Imperial language matrix. I am Captain Mara Vance of the United Earthship Vanguard. I command the human migration fleet that you have twice engaged in battle. I request direct communication with your fleet commander. Krygan studied the figure with intense interest. Human. The word registered dimly in his memory from xenobiological briefings, a minor species from an unremarkable system in the galactic periphery. Nothing in those briefings had suggested technological capabilities of this magnitude. Accept the transmission, he instructed. Two-way communication. The hologram flickered as the connection was established. Captain Vance's eyes widened slightly as Krygan's image appeared before her. The first clear view of a Zepyrian High Commander. I am Grand Admiral Krygan of the Sovereign Zepyrian Empire. You have entered Imperial space without authorization and engaged Imperial forces. Explain your presence and intentions. Vance's expression remained steady. Admiral, our intentions are peaceful. We seek passage through your territory to reach habitable systems beyond. We are refugees, not invaders. Refugees with impressive military capabilities. Krygan noted. Survivors with the will to protect what remains of our civilization, she countered. Our world is gone, Admiral. Destroyed by a cascading ecological collapse that we could not reverse. What you see is all that remains of humanity, approximately 2 million individuals aboard converted civilian vessels. We modified our ships for defense only after it became clear that the galaxy is not as welcoming as we had hoped. Krygan considered her words carefully. And you expect the Empire to simply allow an unregistered species to migrate through sovereign territory? To settle in proximity to Imperial worlds? We expect nothing, Vance replied with surprising candor. We hope for compassion, but we are prepared for its absence. The systems we seek are well beyond your established territories. According to our astronomical data, we require passage only. Zarn leaned close to Krygan, speaking softly. Sir, our scans confirm significant radiation signatures consistent with their claim. The vessels show evidence of hasty departure and long-term space exposure. Krygan nodded slightly, then addressed Vance again. Your tactics during our engagement were unconventional. Effective, but unconventional. For the first time, a hint of pride crossed Vance's features. Necessity breeds innovation, Admiral. We are not a military species by nature. We are builders, creators, explorers. Everything you've witnessed was adapted from civilian technology because that's what we had available. The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with Krygan probing for information about human capabilities, culture, and intentions, while Vance carefully balanced transparency with security. Throughout the exchange, Krygan found himself increasingly intrigued by this species that had converted cruise ships into warships and mining equipment into weapons. When the transmission ended, Zarn waited expectantly for orders. Maintain the blockade, but no further engagement without my direct command. Krygan instructed. Prepare a detailed report for the Imperial Admiralty. Include all scan data and the full transmission record. And your recommendation, sir? Krygan turned to the viewport, gazing out at the distant specks of light that represented the human fleet. That remains to be determined. Major, that remains to be determined. 3 days passed in uneasy stalemate. The human fleet remained in orbit around Zephyra's moon, conducting repairs and redistributing resources, while the Imperial forces maintained their blockade formation at a distance that prevented either side from claiming victory or suffering defeat. In the Vanguard's engineering section, Elena Martel supervised the reconstruction of critical systems, her team working in shifts around the clock to restore the ship's defensive capabilities. Power couplings restored to 86% capacity, she reported, wiping sweat from her brow as Captain Vance inspected their progress. We've salvaged components from the damaged sections of Delta Deck to rebuild the Phantom signature generators. Another 12 hours and we should be operational. Vance nodded approval. Good work, and the fleet status? Mixed results. We've lost too many specialized components that can't be easily manufactured in space. The Artemis reports their agricultural systems are at critical levels. They need replacement hydroponic regulators. The Shanghai Star has restored their manufacturing facilities, but their life support is compromised on 3 decks. Redistribute essential personnel and continue repairs, Vance instructed. Priority to life support, agriculture, and defensive systems, in that order. As they moved through the engineering section, Elena lowered her voice. Mara, the Civilian Council is getting restless. They're questioning the decision to hold position rather than implement Protocol Omega. Vance sighed. The Civilian Leadership Council, composed of representatives from each major vessel, had been established to maintain democratic governance despite their desperate circumstances. While Vance commanded the fleet's defensive operations, the Council's authority in civil matters was absolute. Arrange a meeting. I'll address their concerns directly. The meeting took place in the Vanguard's main conference room, with Council members attending both in person and via holographic projection from their respective vessels. The discussion was heated from the start. We're trapped, Captain. Counselor Demir from the Mediterranean Voyager argued. Each day we remain here depletes our resources while achieving nothing. Protocol Omega gives at least some of our people a chance to escape. To escape to where? Vance countered. Our scouts identified 17 potentially habitable systems within range of our fuel reserves. 15 of those are now confirmed to lie within Imperial territory. Dispersal without a clear destination is suicide. And remaining here to be destroyed isn't, Counselor Lakshmi challenged. The Phantom signatures bought us time, but we cannot win a prolonged conflict against an empire of this size. Vance stood, commanding the room's attention. I'm not suggesting we fight. I've opened a dialogue with their fleet commander. He's listening. Listening while maintaining a blockade, Demir pointed out. Yes, but not attacking. That's significant. Vance activated the central display, showing the tactical situation. Their forces have the capability to overwhelm us, yet they've chosen restraint. That suggests internal debate about how to proceed. Lieutenant Rico, who had been monitoring communications, spoke up. Captain, we're receiving a transmission from the Imperial flagship. Admiral Kriegan is requesting a face-to-face meeting. The council chamber erupted in overlapping voices, some expressing hope, others suspicion. Vance raised a hand for silence. Location? She asked. He proposes neutral ground, the observatory moon, smallest of Zephyra's satellites. Limited security contingents from both sides. Vance considered the offer carefully. It could be a trap, but her instincts suggested otherwise. Throughout their initial communication, Kriegan had demonstrated the calculating precision of a career military commander, but also a surprising degree of curiosity. Accept the meeting, she decided. Inform the Admiral I will attend with a small delegation. After the council session adjourned, Elena cornered Vance in the corridor. This is risky, Mara. We know nothing about their cultural protocols or expectations. Which is why you're coming with me, Vance replied with a hint of a smile. Your engineering background gives you insight into technological capabilities that might be relevant. And if it's an ambush? Then Protocol Omega is implemented immediately, and our deaths buy time for the fleet to disperse. Vance's expression hardened. But I don't think that's their intention. They're curious about us, Elena. That curiosity might be our best hope. The observatory moon lived up to its name. A small, airless satellite with a research outpost built into its cratered surface. The facility had apparently been abandoned years earlier, its equipment removed but structure intact, making it an ideal neutral meeting ground. Grand Admiral Kriegan arrived with a delegation of 4. Major Zarn, 2 security officers, and a scientific advisor whose specialized breathing apparatus suggested a different subspecies of Zephyrian. They waited in the facility's central chamber, a domed room whose transparent ceiling offered a spectacular view of Zephyra's swirling clouds. Captain Vance's shuttle docked precisely at the agreed time. She entered the chamber accompanied by Elena Martel, Lieutenant Rico, and 2 security officers. Their expressions carefully neutral, despite the historical significance of the moment. Humanity's first official diplomatic contact with an alien civilization. The 2 delegations regarded each other with cautious curiosity. The Zephyrians stood nearly a head taller than the humans, their blue-tinged skin and 6-fingered hands the most obvious physiological differences. Their uniforms were elegant in their simplicity, with rank denoted by subtle variations in design rather than ostentatious insignia. Captain Vance, Krygan greeted with a formal inclination of his head. I appreciate your acceptance of this meeting. Admiral Krygan, Vance returned the gesture. I believe direct communication serves both our interests. The initial exchanges were stiff with protocol, each side carefully observing the other's reactions and mannerisms. Gradually, as the discussion turned to practical matters, the tension began to ease. Your fleet's modifications are most ingenious, Krygan remarked, studying the technical specifications Vance had agreed to share. Particularly your phantom signature technology. Our analysts are still debating how you achieved such effectiveness with relatively simple components. Elena Martel, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. Necessity and limited resources force creative solutions, Admiral. The phantom signatures were originally developed for entertainment purposes, creating immersive experiences on our passenger vessels. We simply amplified the effect and adjusted the frequency to interact with your sensor systems. Krygan's scientific advisor leaned forward with evident interest. You determined our sensor frequencies through observation during the first engagement, and adjusted our countermeasures accordingly. Elena confirmed, adaptive response is a human specialty. The conversation shifted to the human fleet's composition and needs. Vance provided a comprehensive overview of their situation, the ecological collapse of Earth, the hasty evacuation, and their search for a new homeworld beyond Imperial space. 2 million survivors, Krygan mused, from a population of how many? 11 billion, Vance replied quietly. A moment of silence followed this revelation, broken eventually by Krygan. And your intended destination? Vance activated a holographic display showing a star chart. Based on our astronomical data, several systems in this region show promise for human habitation. All lie beyond your empire's current borders, according to our understanding. Zarn studied the chart with a frown. This information is outdated, Captain. Imperial expansion has claimed 3 of these systems within the past decade. 2 others are subject to territorial disputes with neighboring powers. Vance exchanged a glance with Elena. The implications clear. Their planned sanctuary was already claimed. Then we must look further, she said finally. Our fleet can sustain itself indefinitely through recycling and manufacturing, provided we have access to raw materials. We require only passage through Imperial territory to reach unclaimed regions. Krygan's expression remained unreadable. Passage for a fleet of your size, with your demonstrated capabilities, would require Imperial sanction at the highest levels. The Admiralty is concerned about the precedent this might establish. We pose no threat to your empire, Vance insisted. We seek only survival. A species that converts cruise ships into warships and mining equipment into weapons is inherently concerning, Captain. Krygan replied, though his tone held a note of respect rather than accusation. Your adaptability makes you unpredictable. The meeting continued for several hours, delving into specifics of human technology, culture, and intentions. Throughout the exchange, Vance sensed that Krygan was gathering information not merely for strategic purposes, but out of genuine curiosity about her species. Whether that curiosity would translate into support remained uncertain. As the meeting concluded, Krygan made an unexpected proposal. I will present your case to the Imperial Admiralty. In the meantime, I offer a gesture of good faith. Your fleet has sustained damage and requires materials for repairs. There is an uninhabited planetoid in this system with substantial mineral deposits. I will authorize your mining vessels to access these resources, under observation from Imperial patrols. Vance recognized the offer for what it was, a test of human intentions as much as a practical concession. We accept your offer, Admiral, and will comply with all reasonable restrictions. As the human delegation prepared to depart, Krygan addressed Vance privately. Your species has endured tremendous loss, yet persevered. That resilience is noteworthy. It's simply who we are. Vance replied. When faced with extinction, humans don't capitulate. We adapt. Krygan nodded slowly. So I have observed, a quality both admirable and concerning. Perhaps someday merely admirable, Vance suggested. Perhaps, Krygan acknowledged, though whether he believed it remained unclear. The following weeks established a cautious routine. Human mining vessels, under Imperial observation, extracted needed materials from the designated planetoid. The main fleet remained in orbit around Zephyra's moon, conducting repairs and maintaining constant vigilance, while the Imperial blockade continued at a respectful distance. Aboard the UES Vanguard, Captain Vance reviewed the fleet's improved condition with her senior staff. Manufacturing capacity restored to 92%. Elena reported, the agricultural vessels report optimal production levels, and life support systems have been fully repaired across all major habitat ships. And our defensive capabilities? Vance asked. Significantly enhanced, Lieutenant Rico confirmed. The Phantom signature system has been refined based on what we learned about Imperial sensor technology. We've also improved our drone coordination systems and redistributed weaponry to create more balanced defense zones. Vance nodded approval. And the civilian population? Dr. Linden provided this update. Stabilizing. We've seen a decrease in stress-related illnesses as the immediate threat has diminished. The education centers have resumed full operations, and cultural preservation activities have increased. There were even 3 births recorded last week. This news brought a genuine smile to Vance's face. New life, continuing despite everything they had endured. It represented hope in its purest form. And word from the Admiral? She asked, turning to Rico. Nothing definitive. Our observers report increased communication between the sovereign dominance and what we believe to be the Imperial capital, but the content remains encrypted. Vance considered this information thoughtfully. Maintain current operations and alert status. Whatever decision comes, we need to be prepared. Later that evening, as Vance reviewed population distribution reports in her quarters, Elena arrived with a data tablet and an expression of concern. We've analyzed the star charts provided by the Zephyrians, she said without preamble. If their territorial claims are accurate, there are no viable systems within our range that aren't already claimed by some power. Vance set aside her reports. None? Not with the environmental parameters we require. We could reach the galactic periphery, but the systems there lack the stellar stability needed for long-term habitation. The implications settled heavily between them. Without a clear destination, the human fleet would become permanent nomads, forever searching for a home that might not exist. There is one alternative, Elena continued hesitantly. The Zephyrian Empire is vast. Surely within its borders there must be habitable worlds that remain undeveloped, planets they've claimed but not colonized. You're suggesting we request settlement rights within the Empire? Vance asked, surprise evident in her tone. As a protectorate, perhaps, or with some special status that acknowledges our autonomy while recognizing Imperial sovereignty. Vance moved to the viewport, gazing out at the distant stars. It would mean surrendering our independence, becoming subjects of an empire we barely understand. It would mean survival, Elena countered gently. A chance to rebuild, to preserve what remains of humanity. Isn't that what this journey has always been about? Before Vance could respond, Lieutenant Rico's voice came through the communication system. Captain, priority transmission from the Imperial flagship. Admiral Krygan requests your immediate attention. Grand Admiral Krygan stood before the Imperial Admiralty Council, his posture impeccable despite the subtle hostility emanating from several of the assembled commanders. The council chamber, deep within the Imperial capital on Zephyria Prime, was designed to intimidate with its soaring architecture and ancient battle trophies displayed along the walls. Your report on the human refugees is most disturbing, Admiral. Grand Marshal Vexus stated, his aged features set in disapproving lines. You suggest we permit this unknown species, one that has already demonstrated concerning military capabilities, to pass through Imperial territory unchallenged. I suggest we consider all options. Marshal. Krygan replied evenly. The humans number only 2 million. Their technology, while cleverly adapted, is fundamentally inferior to our own. They pose no strategic threat to an empire of our size and capability. Yet they managed to confound your fleet at Zephyra. Another counselor noted with barely concealed satisfaction. Krygan acknowledged this with a slight inclination of his head. Through innovative tactics rather than superior firepower, their Phantom signature technology was particularly effective, I grant you. But innovation born of desperation is not the same as military might. What guarantees do we have that they will simply pass through our territory and not establish settlements? Marshal Vexus demanded. None beyond their word. Krygan admitted. However, their actions thus far have been consistent with their stated intentions. They have abided by all restrictions placed on their mining operations and made no attempt to expand beyond their current position. The discussion continued for hours, with opinions divided between those who saw the humans as a potential threat to be eliminated and those who considered them a curiosity best observed from a safe distance. Throughout the debate, Krygan advocated for a measured approach, arguing that the humans' adaptability and resilience might eventually make them valuable allies rather than enemies. When the council finally reached its decision, Krygan returned to his flagship with mixed emotions. The outcome was better than he had feared, but far from what he had hoped. Now came the difficult task of conveying this decision to Captain Vance. The transmission was received in the Vanguard's command center, with Captain Vance and her senior staff gathered to hear the Imperial verdict. Captain Vance, Krygan began formally. The Imperial Admiralty has reached a decision regarding your fleet's request for passage through Imperial territory. Vance maintained a composed expression despite the tension that gripped her. We await your word, Admiral. The request for passage has been denied, Krygan stated, and Vance felt her heart sink. But before she could respond, he continued. However, an alternative proposal has been approved. The Empire is willing to grant settlement rights to the human fleet within Imperial territory under specific conditions. Surprise rippled through the command center. This possibility had been discussed only hours earlier between Vance and Elena, and now it was being offered officially. What conditions? Vance asked carefully. Your fleet would be permitted to establish a permanent colony on Novaris III, an unclaimed world within the Arcturus sector. The planet meets your environmental requirements and has abundant natural resources. In exchange, the human settlement would acknowledge imperial sovereignty and agree to certain restrictions on military development and expansion. Vance considered the offer thoughtfully. Would we maintain autonomy over our internal affairs, our governance, culture, education? Complete autonomy in domestic matters. Krygan confirmed. The Empire requires only acknowledgement of its ultimate authority and compliance with Imperial laws regarding interstellar travel and communication. And our technology? Our ships? You would retain your current fleet with the understanding that certain adaptations, particularly your Phantom signature technology, would be shared with Imperial researchers. Future military development would require Imperial sanction. It was more generous than Vance had dared hope. A permanent home for her people, with the protection of the Empire rather than its enmity. Yet the restrictions on military development gave her pause. Humanity would be vulnerable, dependent on Imperial goodwill for their security. I must consult with our Civilian Leadership Council, she said finally. This decision affects all our people. Krygan nodded. Of course, I will await your response. But I should note, Captain, that this offer represents a significant concession by the Admiralty. There were those who advocated for less accommodating approaches. The implication was clear. This might be the best offer they would receive, perhaps the only one. I understand, Admiral. You will have our answer within 24 hours. The debate within the Human Leadership Council was intense and polarized. Some saw the imperial offer as their best hope for survival, while others feared it represented the beginning of human subjugation. "We cannot trust them," Councillor Demir argued passionately. "This empire has existed for thousands of years through conquest and domination. Once we settle under their authority, what guarantee do we have they won't simply absorb us completely?" "What alternative do we have?" Councillor Lakshmi countered. "Our long-range scans confirm what the Admiral told us. There are no unclaimed habitable systems within our reach. We either accept this offer or continue wandering indefinitely." Elena Martel, representing the Engineering Corps, offered a pragmatic perspective. "The technological exchange could benefit us as well. Access to imperial scientific knowledge could accelerate our development by centuries. And the location they're offering, Navaris 3, has abundant resources and a climate similar to Earth's." The discussion continued for hours, with Captain Vance listening more than speaking. As fleet commander, her opinion carried significant weight. But the final decision rested with the civilian council. Finally, as the debate began to circle back on itself, she stood to address the assembly. "We left Earth with one purpose: survival." She began quietly. "Not just physical survival, but the preservation of human knowledge, culture, and potential. We've traveled further than any humans before us, faced challenges no one could have prepared for, and endured losses that will forever mark our history." She moved to the central display, activating an image of Navaris 3, a blue-green world with swirling white clouds, reminiscent of the Earth they had lost. "This is not surrender," she continued. "It's adaptation, something humans have always excelled at. We adapt to new environments, new circumstances, new relationships. The restrictions the Empire proposes are not insignificant, but neither are they unbearable. We would have a home. Our children would grow up under an open sky rather than metal ceilings. Our culture would continue to evolve rather than merely being preserved like a museum artifact." She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of each council member. "I believe we should accept the offer, with careful negotiation of the specific terms. Not because it's perfect, but because it serves our primary mission, ensuring humanity's future." When the vote came, it was closer than Vance had hoped, but the decision was made. The human fleet would accept the Empire's offer, with certain requested modifications to the terms. The final agreement was negotiated over several days, with both sides making concessions. The humans would settle on Novaris 3, acknowledge imperial sovereignty, and share specified technologies. In exchange, they received guarantees of internal autonomy, protection under imperial law, and the right to maintain their fleet for defensive and transportation purposes. The formal signing took place on the observatory moon where Vance and Krygan had first met face-to-face. The document, inscribed in both human and imperial languages, represented an unprecedented arrangement in imperial history: the integration of an entirely new species as a semi-autonomous protectorate. As the formalities concluded, Krygan approached Vance privately. "Your negotiators drove a hard bargain. Captain, I'm impressed." "As were we by yours, Admiral," she replied with a hint of a smile. "I believe both sides can be satisfied with the outcome." Krygan regarded her thoughtfully. "You know, when my scouts first detected your fleet, the Imperial Intelligence Bureau predicted you were an invasion force from beyond known space. When we engaged and discovered your unconventional tactics, that belief seemed confirmed. It wasn't until we understood your situation that a different perspective emerged." "And what perspective is that?" Vance asked. "That adaptation can be more powerful than design. Your people converted pleasure craft into warships, mining tools into weapons. You created phantom fleets from entertainment systems and built agricultural facilities in space that rival our planetary productions. All this from a species that, by your own account, had barely mastered interplanetary travel before your world's collapse." He turned to gaze through the observatory dome at the distant human fleet, still maintaining its perfect formation. "The Empire has existed for 12,000 years through stability and controlled evolution. Your people represent something different: chaotic innovation driven by necessity. It will be interesting to observe how these approaches interact. Vance followed his gaze. We've learned much about survival, Admiral. Now we hope to learn about living again. As do we all, Captain, Crigan replied. As do we all. The migration to Novaris III began 2 weeks later. The human fleet, escorted by Imperial vessels, made the journey to the Arcturus sector in stages, maintaining their perfect formation throughout the transit. Each jump brought expressions of wonder from the civilian population as they witnessed new stars, nebulae, and astronomical phenomena through their viewports. Aboard the UES Vanguard, Captain Vance stood on the observation deck as the fleet made its final approach to their new home. Novaris III grew larger in the viewing screen, its continents and oceans becoming visible as they entered orbit. Elena joined her, eyes wide with emotion at the sight. It looks so much like Earth, she whispered. But it isn't, Vance replied softly. It's something new, a beginning rather than a replacement. As the first landing parties prepared to descend to the surface, Vance received a final transmission from Grand Admiral Crigan. His image appeared on the private communication terminal in her quarters. Captain Vance, he greeted her formally. I wanted to extend my personal congratulations as your people begin their settlement. Thank you, Admiral. Your support was instrumental in this outcome. Crigan inclined his head slightly. I will be returning to the Imperial capital tomorrow. My assignment to oversee your integration is complete, though Imperial representatives will remain in the Arcturus sector. Will you visit Novaris in the future? Vance asked, surprised to find she genuinely hoped he would. Perhaps. The scientific exchange programs will require oversight, and I admit to a certain curiosity about how your settlement develops. He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. I believe the decision to accommodate your people will prove beneficial to the Empire in ways the Admiralty does not yet appreciate. In what way? Fresh perspectives, Captain. In a civilization as ancient as ours, true innovation becomes increasingly rare. Your people have demonstrated remarkable ingenuity under pressure. That quality may prove more valuable than any specific technology you share. The conversation concluded with formal farewells, but as Vance prepared to join the first landing party, she reflected on Crigan's words. The journey that had begun in desperation, the frantic evacuation of a dying Earth, had led to an unexpected new chapter for humanity. Not merely survival, but the potential for growth and contribution to a larger galactic community. As her shuttle descended through Novaris III's atmosphere, Vance watched the planet's surface come into focus. Mountains, forests, oceans that had never known human presence. Soon, the first settlement would take shape. Children who had known only metal corridors and recycled air would run under open skies. Seeds preserved from Earth would take root in alien soil. Human music would sound in a new atmosphere. The shuttle touched down in a meadow of purple-tinged grass, and Captain Mara Vance stepped onto the surface of humanity's new home. Behind her, the first colonists emerged from the vehicle, faces lifted toward the unfamiliar sun, expressions of wonder and hope replacing the fear and uncertainty that had marked their journey. Somewhere high above, Imperial vessels maintained their vigilant watch, a reminder of the complex relationship that would shape humanity's future among the stars. But here, on this new world, something precious had been preserved, not just human life, but human potential. The end of one world had led to the beginning of another, and whatever challenges lay ahead, humanity would face them as they always had, with resilience, ingenuity, and the stubborn determination to forge their own destiny among the stars. In the fading light of Novaris III's first human sunset, Vance looked up at the darkening sky where the first stars were becoming visible. Among them, barely distinguishable from the ground, were the lights of their fleet, the converted cruise ships, cargo haulers, and mining platforms that had carried them across the void. Ships that had become weapons when necessary, then homes, and now monuments to what humans could accomplish when faced with impossible odds. The Empire had been terrified by what they'd perceived as a human armada, In truth, it had been something far more powerful, a civilization's refusal to fade into extinction, transformed into the most remarkable migration in human history. As night fell on their new world, the work of building began.